Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 50 of our weekly Q&A videos / podcast. If you're on the video, you can check out the links in the description to access this on... See, I always want to say all the major podcasting platforms, but I don't know how many there are. And so it's some of the major podcasting platforms. It's like all the ones that I'm aware of, but I have no clue if there are more.
How does that relate to theory of mind? Because part of me is thinking everybody should know what you're thinking, because they can imagine who being you, and then thinking, okay, so now I know the ones that he knows. It's like when somebody asks you, "Oh, if where do I know you from?" Mm-hmm. Like it's an impossible kind of question.
Yeah. Well, so because the interesting thing is that the podcast app that I use is not the same as these lists, but I can add our podcast because there's an RSS feed. So theoretically, any good podcast app should let you add directly from the RSS feed, even if it doesn't categorize it in its sort of search functionality. Right. But it's interesting because apparently the different podcast apps act differently. And one thing that I heard from one podcast that I listened to, Behind the Bastards with Robert Evans, is that there's actually people were having issues where they were hearing edits happen in different places, and so the actual audio file that was going out, there were parts that were supposed to have been cut or whatever else, and there was weird audio stuff happening, right, which is interesting because I don't know if their workflow involves them actually editing the podcast in sort of their RSS, right, and that the file is somehow uploaded and then modified in the actual feed.
It seems like it's possible, only because say when we upload a video to YouTube, there's editing features. I've never taken advantage of it because it always seems so cumbersome, and it would take much longer. Yeah, it's interesting.
And the other thing is that you can also do ads that update sort of in a smart way. Right. So there's you can sell somebody an ad campaign
for time period. So it's only good for.
You can either sell them for the next 10 episodes they do. I'm going to do that, and they're in there forever. Or you can do it for the next month. I'm going to live edit your, little clip of audio into all of my episodes. Right. So there's a lot about it that I don't really know, right? And that I don't really get. But anyways, it's available on a lot of podcasting platforms. Yeah.
So this is where we bounce off each other a little bit, because you talk about sort of the podcast aspect and why it's good to listen to it, and not that you need to sell it up because people were asking us for it. But this is where I talk about the video a little bit to entice you to come back to watch it. So I said last time, and it should be obvious, I've been trying to use the current challenge character in the background play video. And it's sort of reinvigorated my joy of playing Injustice in a way that wasn't there when I was just playing specific teams and trying to grind.
It's a little bit of a thinking challenge, right? It's the fun part about it, where there's a bit of planning and work, and it's what we always talked about, or not always, but what we often talked about, where the metagame of Injustice, the actual planning and thinking about it, is where a lot of the fun comes in, and you have to work a lot harder to find the fun just in the playing by itself.
So this is an interesting week, because next week there's no character in multiplayer. It's only the challenge character. It is Raven, and the current one is Animated Batman Beyond, and I've got some footage here of both on the same team.
Nice.
And so I've said this before, is that there's certain kind of, if you're thinking about it a little bit, it's very freeing not to be grinding anymore, because once we got the team to the maximum, or not the maximum, the Valorium alloy that was needed to do everything we needed to, we don't need more Valorium alloy. So we're freed for a couple weeks. So if we wanted to play the Phantom Zone tasks, we can, but if we don't, we can just play with the different teams. And so what's neat is it didn't occur to me, I'm sure it occurred to me at some sort of visceral gut level. It didn't occur to me when I played it now. Raven, when early in the game, when you're fighting teams that are tougher and that outclass you by a lot, her passive literally changes the game. It gives you a chance to win fights that you have no right to win. And so for those who don't know, it's when her health drops enough, you swap health with the opponent. Yeah. So when the other team is that much better than you, way better than you, her passive is amazing. But when you're fighting a team that's about the same as you, and it's sort of a competitive fight otherwise, it's hard to take advantage of her passive. Her passive, which is her best feature, doesn't really come into play much, because you could just as easily do the damage to take their health down.
Yeah.
And the time that it takes
a lot better in unbalanced fights.
It's a lot better in an unbalanced fight where you're the underdog.
Yeah. It's balancing. It brings you up. Oh gosh, it's the idea of positive versus negative feedback loops, kind of. Where in games there's ideas of if you are good and you're playing well, you're rewarded for positive play with better stuff.
Yeah.
So
you just get better.
You just get better in a snowball. So it's the difference between online and offline play, where online play is a positive feedback loop, where the better you play, you get more specials, and you're dealing more damage, and you're taking less damage.
Right.
So when you're playing better, everything is working sort of all together to make it easier. Whereas in offline play, when you were dealing more basic damage, they are generating more power. Yeah. And the power is sort of a balancing factor that makes it easier for somebody to come back.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it's the opposite of Blackest Night Batman's, where he does more damage the less health somebody has. Mm-hmm. So it just gets faster. Mm-hmm. It gets easier the weaker they get. This is the opposite. Yeah. Her passive is better the stronger they are.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's like all right, so it's weird. So again, I'm sure that this is not earth-shattering or just a revelation, but if you are early to the game, the upcoming challenge for Raven should probably be the single most important thing. In my mind, I knew that intellectually, I knew that she was becoming less relevant to us, and I didn't enjoy putting her on teams.
But it wasn't as clear why.
It just never occurred to me why. And I think maybe what I need to do now is to start... This is not the team, and this is not the way I'm playing it, but I should set up a team where I don't care about using her passive, and I should just... You know how you... Highlighting a character, it's typically to... just use them as the specialist and give them attention to a master. I should just do that. Because there's other characters I played without taking advantage of the passive. But one thing that was holding me back from this was my memory of her being so important when we first got her and how good she is in Survivor to take down some of the late stage people who have like hundreds of thousands of health.
You were anchored in your first perception of her.
Right.
That's why. So this is like a psychology thing. The sort of first thing you're given, there's an anchoring effect.
Right.
Where you're sort of setting up the range, and so that's why when you're negotiating, the first number you give somebody will change what they're willing to pay for a product.
Right.
And so if somebody else comes to you with a high initial offer, and that's why. In so many of those, you talk about, stores where haggling is really accepted, right? And they say, this is the price, but for you, this. That's why you can see something that's like 90% off, right? And you go, the price is supposed to be $200, but I'm getting it for $20. And even if you only would have paid, $15 for it if you hadn't seen the price tag,
the
90% off matters. And even if it's not believable, that's the interesting thing. Is that even if the first number is ridiculous, if you give somebody a ridiculous number, I don't know how, out in the middle of nowhere, this costs $3 billion or whatever, right? I'm sure there's some level where it doesn't work, but they've found that even when you give a number that is absolutely not reasonable, it still increases slightly, but noticeably the amount that people are willing to pay for a thing. So you had this idea in your head of her being super ridiculously important and her passive being critical and everything else.
And it was justified at the time. It was totally.
And so because that's the sort of your anchoring point in your head, now when she's different, you're still thinking about that initial anchor point. And so even if she's better than, a lot of other characters that you use the exact same way, you don't want to use her that way because the anchoring point in your head is something different. And she's already better than, whatever she'd be now to you.
Right. What's funny is that after playing her again more recently, one place where she really shines is against another Raven Prime.
Interesting.
When you bring
back
it down,
and forth.
You swap out all your health swaps, and I think you end up with nothing, or I can't remember because it just whacks back and forth. I think if you get them
it
down
depends on who
first,
starts it.
then you can end up. It was kind of ridiculous how fun it was, and it just totally neutralizes the opponent's Raven.
That's a little goofy.
It is.
Yeah.
So when I get to playing it some more, I think I'm going to try it and then swap out. But I'll tell you what else I've gotten a better, greater appreciation for, and I think my appreciation for her was already better than most people who do all those tier lists. Yeah? Hawk Girl. Hawk Girl, even if you don't need to swap out fast, you always benefit from being able to have the option when you need to. And because the cooldown period is so short, you almost always can swap out when you want.
Behind every team that relies on people swapping in and out a lot, there's a Hawk Girl.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of spectacular, and I think that people are just. This is going to be a maybe unpopular opinion. I think people are just getting it wrong. If people have a tier list that does not have Hawk Girl at the top or near the top, I think they're sort of selling her short.
She sets up other people for slam dunks, and so she doesn't seem as good by herself. But yeah,
I don't know that there's any other team passive that's nearly as powerful as that.
Okay.
I mean, there's lots that are, more powerful than that. I also want to point out, just to anchor this in the time, Happy Valentine's Day to everybody.
Yeah.
If you celebrate it, it's a funny kind of holiday.
Well, it's not religious, so it's saying if you celebrate it. I think.
Well, no, because let's say you don't. Let's say you resent the idea that corporations have created some event in order to have you buy and sell more stuff, or buy more stuff they're selling. But if you take it in its sort of way as just a chance to, it's like, yay, Thursday, like just a chance to just celebrate stuff.
It's maybe as a reminder to be mindful and put effort into your relationships.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Or romantic relationships. I think it can be.
Well, because it's funny, because when you say it like that, there's a pressure. I remember, all right, so I don't know if I've told you the story about my mom, but way back in the day.
Yeah.
And, Christmas comes around.
Yeah.
And we would just give presents and stuff. We didn't have a lot of money, so we would just do something that was, in retrospect was probably not great, but it was something. You make the effort. And my mom would say, oh, it doesn't matter what it is. It as long as you're kind to me every day or good to me. Yeah, and it felt like it was just such a crappy thing to say in retrospect. Sorry, Mom. But I still remember that, because that was it just felt, I knew it wasn't quite right at the time, but I couldn't figure out exactly why, and I know why, because it's just, anyways.
That's a little funny.
It is.
There was also, my friend got an email marketing from Red Lobster, and the ad copy was so ridiculous. It was a Valentine's Day ad copy.
Yeah.
But it was for like Galentine's Day.
Oh, that's like from Parks and Rec.
Yeah, but also I think it's like it was a thing before that, and
oh, was it?
I think so. I don't know if Parks and Rec was the thing that popularized Galentine's Day. I think it was.
That was a hilarious thing. I think so. I don't know that it existed before that.
Well, there's like Friendsgiving and Galentine's Day, but it was like a Galentine's Day thing where they're like, it's Lobster Fest. And come with your gal pals and like drink mimosas, and we have like a million lobster things, like get your like best like Galentine's outfit on. It's gonna be like a day like no other, and come down for unlimited cheddar bay biscuits.
Treat yourself.
And so there was something incredible and very funny about them being like, Happy Valentine's Day, come with your girlfriends to Red Lobster for biscuits. That felt so specific. And it felt a little like, and I know that it's all arbitrary, right? It feels a little bit like how KFC in Japan managed to successfully brand themselves as the Christmas dinner.
Oh, you were telling me about that once. I remember that.
And it's just a thing. Like, KFC is like the Christmas meal in Japan. It's the traditional Christmas meal. I don't know if everybody... I'm sure not everybody does it, but I don't know if everybody has bought into that, how much of an adopt base it's gotten, but I know that it's talked about as like the sort of traditional thing there.
Right.
And so I find it very funny imagining Red Lobster not even trying to necessarily corner the Valentine's market, but specifically the Galentine's market in their marketing. Right. And I wonder if it had something to do with sort of like the demographic information, like the age of the person who was showing me the email, or what it was, but it was very funny to me.
Right. That's funny.
Anyways, so let's get into maybe our first comment of the week.
Can I do one more thing?
One more thing.
Just to ground it in.
Okay.
So I had a really nice... I'm just very happy with this. So I'm all jazzed about it, and I wanted to mention it. So there was a writer's sort of conversation interview that was coming up, And I found out about it the day after it was announced.
Oh.
And the ticket sold out. I went to the site, ticket sold out. They said you can go on a wait list. And I think, well, what's it going to hurt? I did not have high hopes for it. And then I got an email saying, hey, you're off the wait list. Nice. Click on this link to get a ticket.
Nice.
And then I clicked on the link. This event is sold out.
Oh.
It is no longer there's nothing more online. And at the point I was thinking, man, it would have just been better never to have heard about it because I wouldn't be so like that low right after the high.
Yeah.
And then this is why I love the internet. So I reached out to one of the organizers, moderators.
Yeah.
And she said, hold on, let me check on that. Yeah. And then, hey, it's try it again. It should be working. And it was. Ooh. So I am going to a reading that I've been looking forward to, and they're going to have a signing afterwards. I can get some books signed. It's been so long since I've gone to one of these things because, I mean, you know, hey, pandemic, right? Yeah. But also, there weren't any events that I had been looking forward to for so long like that. So I'm just really jazzed that it, you know, the ups and downs. It was if I hadn't had the lows, it wouldn't feel so high right now. Yeah. So I'm really happy about that.
Okay, well, I almost want to say congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. But anyways, our first comment this week comes from Cameron107, and this is kind of the back and forth that we've been having, where we talk a little bit, at least a little bit each week.
So the context was, this is the next bit of the conversation about homelessness and how sympathy sometimes is contingent upon people being blameless.
Or at least a conversation we'll have about people is whether or not they deserve it.
Yes.
And we talked about how, you know, on a fundamental level, who cares? Right?
Right, because there's lots of other things where people aren't blameless that we're still able to not only have sympathy, but we're able to help them and willing to help them.
And so Cameron says, you're absolutely right. Even if you are in that situation because of your own doing, it shouldn't and doesn't mean you deserve any less sympathy. I think I've just spent too much time talking to people who chalk it all up to a lack of personal responsibility that I instinctually try to argue that it's not their fault, even though it doesn't really matter, as you mentioned. And then finally, and thank you for the kind words, I find your conversations to be really thought-provoking, which is a big reason as to why I comment as much as I do. And so I want to start sort of the first thing, because I think this is like one of the things that's kind of like poisoning discourse in a lot of cases, which is that it can be really hard to have conversations about stuff, because especially when people are kind of more immersed in certain political spaces, they learn these sort of techniques, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, for how to, like, quote unquote, like, win or be better at, like, an argument, right? How to have an argument more effectively. Right. And a lot of cases, you know, what ends up happening, and I, you know, with my positionality, we are obviously a lot more both socially and economically progressive, right?
Sure, in North America, relatively.
Yeah,
sure.
Relatively. Yeah. And I think also in a lot of spaces, relatively speaking. I don't think I'm, you know, I'm not the most extreme left person, but that's sort of where my positionality is. And so when I think about sort of arguments, conversations, and debates, I think about the type of people who would want to have arguments, conversations, or debates with me. So my experience of people doing stuff is mostly from people who are more socially or economically right. Conservative, yeah. And so there's these sort of conversations that you get stuck in where stuff like the Gish Gallop, right? Where you're just giving more information, you're saying it's facts, it's ideas.
And for the people who are listening, so I know this, the Gish Gallop it's a rhetorical technique where you give so many different disputable things that it makes it overwhelmingly difficult to even address all of it, because then there's the stuff that you don't address. It's not that they're right, it's that there's just not enough time to properly dispute that, to show, hey, this is why this is untrue, this is untrue, this is untrue. And the strategy is just to overwhelm your opponent with just so much junk.
Yeah, and then when people sort of leave that conversation, and I think a lot of times these debates and conversations and arguments happen for sort of the personal satisfaction of the people having them, of feeling like they were right and that they won.
Of winning.
And then if they happen in a public forum, a lot of times, they happen for the benefit of people listening.
Right.
More than for, like, coming to a new conclusion.
Absolutely, that's a great point, because a lot of times it's performative.
Yeah.
You're not doing it to convince the person you're arguing against. You're doing it for the people who are watching, who might be potentially convinced by the performance that you're giving.
Mm-hmm. And so you can sort of leave either thinking, I said all these things, and, you know, there's all these things that you didn't respond to, right? So I keep all of these. If you didn't respond to them, then I can keep these as, you know, true in my heart, that you didn't have a response to them. Or if, you know, somebody's walking away from it, it goes, you know, maybe, you know, you proved one or two of the things I said to be wrong, but this other person's head is full of facts, right? Or things that feel like information. Mm-hmm. And if they believe, you know, one or two of them, then that's a win. I've put something in their head. If they say a lot of what they said was wrong, but I think this one thing might be right, then that's still sort of moving the needle a little towards your side, unless, you know, that person comes away from the conversation thinking you just look like a fool who's just spouting off like a bunch of random stuff. And so I think, you know, it can be really hard. And I think, you know, I'm not saying I'm immune to this either, right? I think on some level, when I hear somebody who is saying something that feels so obviously intrinsically wrong to me, I don't really think I'm going to convince that person. Sometimes I just kind of want to have a fight with them. I go, you're wrong though, right? Like, you're wrong.
It's like the XKCD. It's, hey, it's time for bed. I can't. There's somebody wrong on the internet.
Yeah, where there's a certain sort of like, there's a thing in my lizard brain, and I know it's not helpful to me. I'm not going to convince them. I'm either going to feel bad about the conversation if I found it frustrating, or I'm going to feel good about it in like kind of like a not useful or in probably not a great way. I'm going to
unhealthy,
like a moral superiority way, where I'm like, I beat you. I proved that you were wrong, even though the other person walks away from that conversation going, that guy just talked too much, and I don't. That guy's totally ridiculous, right?
And they're even less likely to endorse that opinion, like come around to that opinion, because of their association with their interaction with you. Yeah.
Because the thing is that, like, it's like that when we talk about that, like, righteous anger. Yes. Because I think even if I'm right in that situation, it's unfortunate because you can still be a jerk, even if you're right. And even if you're arguing for, you know, being more compassionate, even if you're arguing for supporting sort of your fellow person, right? You can still be a jerk when you're having that conversation. It's true, right? It's you can't excuse anything because, you know, that person is arguing against like the rights of trans people, and I'm arguing for the rights of trans people. There's a clear moral high ground there, but, you know, it doesn't mean that you can just say anything and you can just say screw you and then, you know, whatever. Right. And so I think
there's a principle that's more important than just winning, right? Sometimes if it's a really odious kind of opinion, whether it's something that's racist, something that's whatever kind of prejudice, there is a higher sort of moral goal to actually convince people so that our world can be a little bit more tolerant, a little better place. So, and you know that intellectually in your not lizard brain, you know that. But
and I will say that, you know, I'm talking about myself in these conversations. If there's like a trans person who's having a conversation with somebody who is using rhetoric that is used to like dehumanize them, to strip them of their rights, that person is allowed to be as mad as they want. There's no sort of moral low ground for them just going off on that person. You know,
agreed, totally agreed.
Because I don't get to police, you know, when somebody is actively being harmed by somebody else in their rhetoric.
It's their existence. Whether it's a sexist or a racist, when people are arguing a point that is literally harmful and dangerous to your life. Then it's not an argument anymore. It's survival.
That's like kind of you're in like you're getting like abused, right? You're getting like attacked, right? And that can get your hackles up and back you into a corner, and you know, even if somebody's trying to have a conversation on like intellectual grounds, that is a lot more of like
there's a huge amount of privilege there when you can have that conversation in theory. When some people, it is a matter of survival. So like, you know, when somebody's backed into a corner like that, I think it's a lot hard. So I'm not saying that, you know, like a trans person in that situation can't just be angry and say stuff out of that anger. Even if it doesn't accomplish anything, I think they're well within their right. And
at a certain level, there's something to be said for just that feeling good, that righteous anger being a little worthwhile if that's what you sort of need in that moment.
Oh, for sure.
But my sort of larger point with this is that I think it's unfortunate, right? So like Cameron's having this argument, and you already have in your head, right? This is the type of person who's going to disagree with me. This is the argument that I need to make. This is sort of the way I need to be. And so that, like, the way that people like are kind of in your head a little bit, that you're having a discussion on their terms, even when they're not there.
Right. That's why I like to say, hey, I'm pro-abortion. Like, it's enough of a difference to maybe wake people. And the connotation of that's not great, of waking people up, but just really making people aware that shift has happened, even if they're not willing to come along with me to reframe it.
Instead of having the conversation on somebody else's terms, when you are choosing what to say, having the conversation on your own terms and saying exactly what you mean and trying to be sort of comprehensive in what your stance is, and not in sort of this response that you're creating for the type of person you imagine is going to have something to say to you, right? To follow up. And so I think that's like one of those things is that like you, it's that, we talked about theory of mind, right? Earlier in the episode, sort of on an unrelated thing.
It's funny you call it episode. To me, it's like a few minutes ago.
Just
a few minutes ago.
But it's the idea of there's this sort of like character in your head. There's this person you've constructed. And you're like, I know what this person is going to say to me. I know sort of
what matters to them.
Yeah. If I'm trying to convince somebody, this is what I need to say to reach the person that I need to convince. And I think there's something really valuable about that. I think it is really important to have, but it's also, I think the problem is that, in my opinion at least, the type of thing where you're saying, oh, does this homeless person deserve it? Should we not help them because they deserve it? Is too extremely uncompassionate and too much of like a sort of like a morality test.
So
for me to like, I almost don't want to engage on that level because it makes me feel a little sad that you could look at somebody and go, I don't think they deserve decent.
Right. The reason why it was interesting when you first responded to this, I did not know where you were going. And in my mind, when I was looking at that question, I focused on a different part of it. The part that struck me as the most interesting was the lack, that part where it says, talking to people who chalk it all up to lack of personal responsibility. And I was thinking, that's where the shift in the conversation happens, or the failure happens, if you allow that to pass. Because the need for personal responsibility for everything without acknowledging all the people that have contributed to your current position, whatever it may be, it's a weird sort of short-sightedness. Because whether you're talking about people who are, I'm going to do air quotes right now, self-made millionaires or whatever, what they're ignoring is that all that tax money that went into creating the communication systems and the transportation systems and whatever else it was that made your business possible, that the subsidized education that gave you or your workers the intellectual training or the skills training or whatever that got you to the point. Like, you rely on a functioning society so that there are not marauders at your door ready to steal whatever you made. I don't know. It's just funny. Like, I feel like that's a big part of the cancer, that if you could just remove that kind of framing from the discussions that you have, would make everything so much more, like you're saying, compassionate, empathetic, and more reasonable. Because
it's a very like Western individualistic way of thinking about stuff. And I think for a lot of people, like myself included, it's an easier way of thinking about stuff.
Right. It's the idea that there's like a just universe. Everybody wants that. They want stuff to make sense so that they're not as vulnerable to the vagaries and the randomness of stuff that can happen to you.
But it also, it sort of compresses the possibility space and the number of variables you need to influence. and think about. And so it was interesting. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and they said, I think the way that you talk, I used to think that you were really sort of wary of planning or thinking about the future, because a lot of times they would ask me oh, what do you think you're going to be doing in this time? Do you want to do this one day? And I would go, do you think you're going to do this? And I would just always be I have no clue, right? And sort of in my own head I was I know how many weird tiny things, the fact that when I was in middle school I sat next to somebody who played this game, right? And I watched them play, and they let me play a couple rounds.
Is that Injustice?
Yeah, Injustice. Yeah, exactly. But if I sat in a different desk, or if I didn't talk to them so much, and part of the reason why
neither of us would have played.
Yeah, part of the reason why I talked to them is one of my friends at the time, had a crush on them, and they were good friends, and so they were sort of a secondary social relationship. So when I was in this class, it made more sense to sit next to somebody who I already kind of knew than somebody I didn't know. And so there's all these sort of little things, and I say that happened this many years ago, and it changed so many things about what my weekly schedule looks like now. Right? And something that stayed consistent when my weekly schedule has changed in every other facet. Right. This is one of the things that has been most consistent when most other things have been in flux. And so the fact that was caused by something so small, if I try to extrapolate that out, I don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years. That's going to totally change the sort of course of my life, so that, me saying anything about what I think I'm going to be doing 5 years from now is a guess, right? Our best mathematical models can't predict the weather for more than a week. Why do I think I'm going to be able to predict the course of my life for more than a couple of years?
So have you heard about the idea of the singularity?
Yeah.
So to me, I'm going to screw up the explanation, but the part that I always took away from it was that there is potentially some event that can happen beyond which it's going to be impossible to predict it, because it's going to have such a far-reaching and such a fundamental sort of destabilizing effect for how we understand the world and what's possible, that it's sort of an event in our future that makes any time after unpredictable. This is you're talking about the singularity on such a micro scale.
But everybody has little singularities. The singularity happens to you every couple of years.
So one thing that's interesting, and I want to address this because I think it comes up a lot, at least in the conversations I have with people, is that when you acknowledge that there's a lot of stuff that's random, when you acknowledge that there's a lot of stuff out of your control, when you acknowledge that the universe is not just, and that things happen not because people deserve it, but just because it happens, that there's the potential for despair, of feeling well, I've got no control over it. What's the point of even trying? And I think to me the opposite is true, that when there is an element that is out of your control, then the strategy should be, so there's this part that is in my control. I'm going to control the heck out of it. I'm going to do as much as I can to make sure that this part that is under my control, that's my responsibility, I'm going to make sure that I do as best as I can, that part is done right. And if anything, it gives me sort of motivation to make sure that I take care of this stuff, because there's going to be so much more that's out of my control. Yeah. Interesting.
So before we move on, I want to say one last thing. Everything that we're talking about now, singularity and sort of predicting stuff in the future. I've been thinking about sort of how I feel about AI for a while now. And I have complicated feelings about it that I don't think are suited for the amount of time that we have left. I don't know exactly how I feel about it. I haven't really worked through it. But I watched a really sort of exceptional video from the YouTuber Tom Scott recently called "I Tried Using AI, It Scared Me." And I like his opinion a lot. I watched it recently, and I think it's important to, even when there are people that you really tend to like the opinions of and agree with broadly, like Tom Scott, to sort of think critically about how you feel about sort of information and takes and opinions that they share critically before I say too much about it. So I will say that it felt very emotionally instantly appealing to me, and I really liked. I've heard a lot of opinions about AI, and a lot of them have felt really sort of capitalistic, sensationalized, sort of like tech bro-y to me.
Right.
And this one felt really balanced and interesting and cool. And so Tom Scott, it's I tried using AI, it scared me, is the name of the video.
Right.
And I think it's really worth watching. And he kind of talks about that same thing where, about technology development being on a curve, right? Mm-hmm. Where there's an introduction of a new technology. There's a huge amount, like a huge explosion of its utility and usefulness when it becomes big enough.
Okay, yeah, I think.
And then it levels off at some point. And the thing that his sort of
sometimes it takes a swing in the opposite direction before it comes back up and levels off.
But sort of his overarching thesis is that he doesn't know where we are in the curve with AI, and so that's why it's sort of scary. There's this unknown, right? We might be near the end of what it could be, and we might be near the start, we might be in the middle, and all those mean very different things for what the future is going to look like.
Right.
Based off of sort of the future utility of these tools. And I think that one of the reasons why I like that opinion so much is because I think there's a lot of people when you talk about tech and you talk about things like singularity, about looking towards the future and prognosticating, predicting one reality. And so a lot of the people talking about AI right now are talking about sort of the one reality where it can replace most human labor, where it's going to do all of these things, where we know that we're on the path now to that.
Yeah.
And so I think why I really like Tom Scott's opinion is because it's a fundamentally couched one. It's one that's fundamentally based off of the fact that we don't know what the future will hold. And it can acknowledge the potential of the future without taking it for granted or taking it as inevitable, right? And it is based off of sort of a healthy dose of belief in the potential of this technology with like sort of skepticism and waiting to see what actually happens instead of just making these sort of really wild, grand predictions about what definitely is going to happen, like the future that we are going to be moving into.
Right.
And so I think that also sort of helped me think about how, you know, with these conversations that, you know, I just talked about having with like my friend about being able to predict the future, how I like to think about the world in the future. And I think I'm the type of person who fundamentally wants to view things with both hope and positivity, hopefully, but then also a healthy amount of skepticism, but also just awareness of the limitations of sort of my brain as like a machine to predict the future, right? As like an imperfect machine, where even if I have plans and goals and wants that I think are achievable, that's different from being there. And, you know, having a goal for something is not the same as knowing that it's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the cliche is you hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Yeah.
That sort of captures a little bit of that.
Yeah.
The broadness of the possibilities. Yeah.
So I don't even know. We got really off topic here, but
I guess so. I feel like it's sort of really on point. It was a good comment, and I think it touches on so many different things that we were trying to at least maybe try to wrap our heads around a little.
Yeah. And I guess if there's one tip, I think I've also had conversations with some of my friends recently where we've had conversations about politics and things, and I have felt at least a little bit less pressure to be correct. Especially, and it's easy when you're sharing opinions with your friends and people who you inherently have trust with, where you can share an opinion and there's sort of like the layered levels of like how right you need to be. Where if you're like sharing an opinion on social media, I want to be pretty confident that I have done my research and thought about it, and that I've worked through my thoughts before I say something for the first time.
Right.
And that's why here, I will try to say, I need to think about this more. I don't know. I try not to make sort of big, conclusive statements about stuff that I haven't had time to percolate, because I'm putting this out into the world, even if it's not associated with my name.
Right.
And then you sort of can step down layers to, and at the sort of lowest level is people who you are close enough with that you can be really wrong about something, and you can even say some things that might be potentially damaging, like bad things, right? You can have thoughts or opinions or beliefs that are kind of crappy, and you can work through them with that person, and be wrong and have your mind change and stuff. And so I think that's and with the conversation we've had talking about like personal responsibility and everything, I think that's something that's really important. And I think we should collectively as like people work on being willing to be wrong and having our minds changed, even in slightly scarier, higher pressure contexts,
higher stakes,
and that we should be willing to sort of share our positionality and our stance openly, and then be told that we're wrong and be wrong, and learn and grow from it. Because I think for a lot of people, I know, you know, I feel like sometimes I don't have as strong opinions about something until like we talk about it for this podcast, and it helps coalesce and crystallize how I actually feel.
It helps temper it.
Yeah,
I like that idea because it's like a sword that you're beating into, you're putting under heat, and you're tempering it by, is that the word? Is it, maybe that's not even the right word, but in my mind I connect it where you're beating it and you're hardening it, and then you're cooling it and then heating it, and you're just sort of shaping it.
Yeah, and so I think, you know, that sort of, that whole issue that we've been talking about and around, about like other people sort of having arguments to win. Yeah. I think we would all do a lot better if we come with to conversation with a little bit of intellectual humility and being more willing to be wrong. And I think some people are very willing to be wrong. I'm saying this because this is something I know I need to do. And I am hoping that I am not alone in this, and that I'm not just the worst person at admitting I'm wrong. And so I
don't think you are.
I'm trying to apply it broadly. I'm trying to say this is something everyone needs to do. But really what I mean is this is something that I need to do, and I think at least some other people need to do.
I had a very close conversation to this with somebody at work just like the other day. And it is exactly the same stuff, because it makes such a huge difference. And I guess the bigger thing is, besides just being wrong, the idea is actually being open to ideas. And I guess you don't even have to be wrong. It's just being open to new ideas.
Yeah, to not be at your final opinion, to not have all the information that you need already in your head.
And this applies perfectly. We were talking about Raven. This is, I feel like it's all the same kind of stuff. Yeah. I think this is a perfect place to end it. And we've been talking for a while. This is not a short episode already.
Okay. So yeah, to finish up, we'd like to give some shout outs out. I forgot to write this one for Eliza, so I'm going to say a shout out to Eliza. She's wrong sometime, Caton. We all are incorrect sometimes. But
she just gets to have that in her name as a nickname for today, for this week.
I just kind of want to be a jerk about it. You're wrong sometimes. Anyways, whatever. We'd also like to give
You might be wrong right now, too.
I might be wrong about that. Maybe she's never wrong. We'd also like to give a huge thank you to our patrons who are potentially wrong sometimes, but definitely not wrong about the decision to support us.
Well, that's good. Nice. That was smooth.
I'm selling it. You could make the right choice and give us money today.
A huge thank you to Korey Ashcraft, supporting the top tier Last Word, and Michael Devries, Irvin Ruiz, Hoshi127, and Drew Chapman, supporting us on the credited level, and all the generous people who have been giving us support during the pandemic.
So thank you so much for your support. Thanks so much to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.